No mai hoki mai. Ahi pai, welcome back. Good afternoon, everyone. We have up now Sarah, and Sarah has been a software engineer professionally working on websites for the better part of 20 years. Sarah is no stranger to talking at LCA, and she last presented in 2018. She introduced the LCA delegates then to a hacked knitting network printer. This time she'll be talking to us about what's been happening since she made her giant star map of the night sky. Sarah's previous LCA talks, as well as some links mentioned in her presentation today, are going to be linked in the chat window, so we'll get those to you now. No mai, Sarah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joel. Yes, the electrifying the knitted universe. Let's get into it. So I hacked a domestic knitting machine from the 1980s and turned it into a network knitting printer. Now, that's quite a statement all by itself. In all fairness, this is actually the start of my presentation to Linux.conf Australia in the Art and Tech Mini-Conf circa 2018 in Sydney. So I don't actually have time to talk about the network knitting printer today because there's a lot of other stuff for us to go through. But I did want to give you the link to it because a few people do find that quite interesting. So the link to it is tinyurl.com/knitprinter. And that's a picture of the network knitting printer by itself. You can see there on the left, there is a Raspberry Pi unit, which is doing the network side of things, and a Arduino-compatible custom board, which is helping me automate a few things for me. So the reason why I bring this up is because this device allows me to knit large pieces of fabric quickly with few errors and at scale. So this is a capability that I've had for a few years now. And one of the key points that came out of this talk was that, what's the point in having a thing that makes things unless you actually make something with it, right? So I wanted to make something really cool with this device. So circa 2018, a few months after LinuxConf in Sydney, Electromagnetic Field Festival is coming up. So Electromagnetic Field is kind of a conference and a festival in the sense that everyone comes, or all the delegates, about 5,000 delegates come to a field to camp for a weekend, and there's also talks going on and a lot of or disorganized things going on as well, where lots of hack spaces all get together and compare notes on projects and things, which is super exciting. There's some really cool things that come to EMF Camp. It's, for example, last time I was there was a bar bot designed to mix drinks on a conveyor belt that was put together by Nottingham Hackspace. There's other things like wind-powered land-crawling sculptures and hacky soapbox races. So I think even last time I was there, I met Matt Denton from BB-8 Star Wars 7 fame, and he had a giant hexapod robot called Mantis. So these sort of events are really quite spectacular, and it is good fun to go to these. So I wanted to bring my own project to this EMF camp held in 2018. I wanted to make something that would inspire young minds in a field of STEM. So knowing that it would be for an event that was camping, mostly attended by city dwellers, I wanted to showcase a piece of science that was all around us. So I thought, well, what better way than by showing them the stars? So that's where this piece was born, printed on my network knitting printer. As you saw in the photo, the network printer isn't 4.6 meters wide. I had to knit this in panels and then stitch them together by hand. So you can see here, you can kind of see it in this photo. There's one panel there, 2, 3, and in continuum, and all stitched together. So I've also got here the original source that I referenced to create the map, ian.hoshifuru.jp. I sourced a Japanese reference largely because they gave me a Creative Commons with attribution license. But I did want to stress that the vector graphic they gave me was not something I could actually use with my knitting printer. I had to handcraft the graphic image because it had to be really, really specific in order to work with my limitations of knitting. So I did have to recreate that graphic by hand. Every one of the stars have a very specific shape to them based on their magnification data. You can see the magnifications there down the bottom. So the size of the stars in the map are relative to their real life brightness. And only the stars that have a at least magnification 5 pictured. So although it's a image of the entire Milky Way, it's only what you can actually visibly see when you're with the naked eye from Earth. So you can see here the all 88 constellations are pictured and 89 constellations are labeled. So you can see here constellation Serpens, which is non-contiguous. It's actually got the Serpens Clauda and then the Serpens Caput both labeled there, which is why there's 88 officially recognized constellations, but 89 labels. Also went through and changed a lot of the lines from the original reference and used my own font that I created specifically for knitting large pieces. I suppose other features you can see in this are the Milky Way, which is this grey cloud through here, and also the equatorial line or Earth's equator, which is represented by this white line is projected out into space. And the reason being that this way, by having Earth's equator in the projected in the map, you can actually see what constellations on this particular date and time are falling in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere. And you can tell that it's set to a particular date and time because we've got the sun, the moon, and all of the planets except for Earth pictured, which is gives us a calendar setting. So I figured this out not long after LCA 2018, actually. I worked out exactly what date and time should be in the star map, and that was, from memory, August 31st of August, 6 p.m. UK time, which happened to be the date and time that I got to EMF grounds and I installed the star map and had it ready for the opening of the EMS festival. So that was really cool. So the actual piece wasn't completely entirely finished until I think the day before I was due to fly out, which is exciting. So this photo, I actually put my son down for a nap, and then I unraveled the star map for the first time in its entirety and got this quick photo. And then, because I was excited and I wanted to let my friends in the UK know I was coming, I sent a tweet out, and it said, after 15 kilograms of wool and over 100 hours of knitting, I'm finally ready to fly to the UK. Now I just need to pack the entire universe in my suitcase. I'll see you all soon. And before I went to bed that night, there was about 50 likes, I think, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic, 50 likes, wow, nothing I've ever done has been liked that much. That's really cool. And in the ensuing days, things went nuts. I was on the plane to the UK, and I was in the middle of a field at EMF Camp, and I was busy doing a lot of things, but the internet had a whole different idea about where this piece should go, which is astonishing. 14,000 retweets, 72,000 likes, and including the long tail, 7 million impressions. I've never gone viral before, and that was quite an experience. So I did, because I wasn't actually keeping track of all of this, I was in the air for 24 hours of it. I really wanted to go back and see what that actually looked like. So this is a cumulative tweet over time with followers graph, which I got a lot of the data from the Twitter API and just wanted to graph it and see what was going on here. So this bubble chart showing you over time, just over the first few days, the arc of the viral retweets and quotes, and cumulative tweets showing the total number of retweets and quotes over the time period. All of the bubbles representing the followers for each of those retweeters and quotes, so you can get a sense of where all the big influencers were sitting. This isn't every single retweet and every single quote, it's only the big influencers, so with followers of about 10,000 plus that arbitrarily chosen. But I did want to say that the first 3 retweeters were John Spencer, David Bell, and Andy Gelmay, all from linux.conf. So it really does show that when linux.conf people are retweeting something, you should really pay attention, because it's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, at the very peak of the curve here, Bad Astronomer, this quote tweet here really did kick off an awful lot of activity. So Bad Astronomer, Phil Plate in the USA, thank you so much. That was incredible. A few other interesting characters here. Rufus Hound, who's a UK actor. I think in the first 2.5 hours in this block here, we've also got Star Talk Radio, which for those who might not be familiar, is a show hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And to think they had an image of my star map within the first few hours of it ever being on the internet, which is just amazing. Another couple of big bubbles here. We've got Mara Wilson, who's an actress, and Andy Richer, who's a comedian. But I did want to stress that the large majority of people who are retweeting it and quoting it were professors, scientists, astronomers, mathematicians, computer scientists. These are all people who clearly had an interest in it on an intellectual level. And I just love that you can have professors and scientists and astronomers causing something to go viral for an intellectual basis in social media. I love that they have that kind of influence that they can do that, which is really cool. I always thought what I do is very niche, but turns out it appeals to a lot of people out there. So in the ensuing few weeks, quite a few media outlets did pick it up. There was quite a few articles written about it that they didn't tell me about it. I found out about a lot of these accidentally. Computer File, Hackaday, and Space.com were all in touch when I was in the field at EMF Camp. Computer File was particularly interesting. It's probably one of my most watched talks, which also happens to be my worst performance. So when I was at EMF Camp, I was horribly jet lagged. I had a nasty flu and I was sleeping in a borrowed tiny one-person tent. So I didn't really perform all that well for that one. Hackaday was good fun. I actually hunted down one of the editors, Jenny List, from Hackaday, who I knew was at the event. She was actually minding her own business in her own tent when I came knocking, and I thought I had a rough time in this camping situation. Her tent was mostly dedicated to a sewing machine, so I highly respect her priorities. Physics World and the Magpie, they're both physical publications, so it didn't just go viral on the internet, it also started to go into print as well, which is amazing. Make magazine, I believe we're actually talking about the star map in the next volume, volume 80 coming soon, talking about that long tail. So keep an eye out for that one, that's pretty amazing. So a few little pro tips, what to expect when you're not expecting fame. Twitter notifications will drive you crazy. There are tens of thousands of likes and retweets and quotes and things, and you just got to turn off notifications, and I still to this day I haven't turned them back on again. Journalists often don't know what questions to ask, particularly when they're looking at a knitted star map. I had to kind of prompt them to start talking about the network knitting printer as well, because that's a big part of how the star map was even able to exist. So I was actually making a press pack when I was flying to the UK. I think I got a bit of a heads up from the EMF camp team to say, hey, maybe you should put something together before you land, because that might be important. So you won't know you need a press pack until you need a press pack, and you'll need to put it all together fairly quickly. Journalists are also on a really tight deadline, so respond quickly to their requests. They can be surprisingly demanding when they think that they're doing you a favor. Also, you won't get paid. So have a think about, if someone's asking you for information on what you're doing for publicity reasons, have a think about what you want out of it. So at the very minimum, having a link back to your blog, your website, or your Twitter account or anything like that, so that all those eyeballs which are engaged in your work can reach out to you and follow you along personally. The long tail, I mentioned that, it's still being retweeted today, it's still being commented today, and there's still articles coming out. Hundreds of negative comments, so that's an interesting one. I'd say that the ratio of positive to negative is approximately 10%. So when something goes viral, you'll get thousands of really positive comments, but also mean an increasing number of positive comments, but also means an increasing number of negative comments. And there are some real doozies too. So it can be hard to not just focus on the hundreds of negative and forget about the thousands of positive, but I do think having lots and lots of negative comments is perfectly normal, and I have learned to just keep on swimming. Right, so EMF Camp was amazing. There was an astronomer when I was there who did an impromptu astronomy lesson with a bunch of students at EMF Camp, and I didn't even know about it. Like, people told me about it afterwards, and I didn't even know that was going to happen or anything. So it was amazing how well received the tapestry was and how engaged people were with it. So it really was incredible. And at the end of the camp, I packed it into a suitcase and brought it back home with me. So the reason why I talk about all the international publicity is because it proved one really important thing, and that's the tapestry is a crowd pleaser. There was tons of evidence that people engaged with the artwork, its story, and wanted to share it with others. So after the conference, it was just sitting in a suitcase for a while, and I made it with the intention to inspire young minds in STEM. I had received a few offers of private sale, but if it goes into some private collection somewhere, I would never be able to go out and inspire young minds in STEM. It wouldn't achieve what it was originally intended for. So I was still trying to work out what I wanted to do with this exactly, or what to do with it next. So I made the proposal to donate it to the State Library of Victoria. And the exciting thing is that when I proposed the donation, they'd actually already heard about it, which is astonishing. And when I explained that it was made in Melbourne using locally resourced materials, I actually sourced all the wool for the tapestry from Bendigo Wool and Mills. They were pretty excited. And also the fact that mysteriously, magically, hardly anyone in Australia has ever actually seen it. So I asked them if they could make it available to the general public, and they said they'd get back to me. Now, the tapestries wasn't my #1 priority at this point. I did actually go on maternity leave with my second child, so it was quite a few months there where there wasn't a huge amount of communication. But astonishingly, whilst I was on maternity leave, the State Library of Victoria assembled an exhibition team with members formed from the curation and conservation teams, and together they designed an exhibition with StarMap as a centerpiece, which is astonishing. I did not expect anything like that. It is truly amazing. So the exhibition name is Handmade Universe, From Code to Craft and the Spaces Between. And it's going to be at the State Library of Victoria, opening sometime in May 2022, and access will be free. So I believe that the State Library of Victoria media team haven't actually made any public announcements yet about this exhibition, although we've been working on it for a couple of years now. But just like yesterday, they gave me approval to give you more details on it and to give you the name of the exhibition, which is amazing. So that's just got approval for that late yesterday. So you guys are absolutely the first to hear about this. So because I haven't been allowed to talk too much about it, I do have starmap.hardapleo.co. So that's just a landing page with the ability to sign up to just a mailing list. And the intent of that mailing list is just to, I'll just send one message out when public comms from the State Library of Victoria go out. I'll just give you all a link to that. And then also probably one more message on that mailing list to let you know when the actual exhibition is open, so you can go along. So I do realize that I've been working on this for such a long time, and a lot of people just say to me, look, just tell me when it's available, tell me when it's ready. And I'm like, okay, well, this is my push notifications with this mailing list. Just sign up to the mailing list, and there's those push notifications if that's what you want. So that's available to you. So more about the exhibition. There are 4 key themes. We've got crafting, coding, astronomy, and mapping. Those are the key themes which are coming out of the star map itself. Really beautiful artworks owned by other institutions across Victoria will also be featured in the exhibition along with the star map. And incredibly new artworks have been commissioned specifically for this exhibition. So the star map has been creating new opportunities for artists across Victoria, which is amazing. I don't have words to describe how incredibly grateful I am for this opportunity. So in addition to all the other opportunities which are going on at the same time, the exhibition team also gave me the opportunity to finish the star map. And by finish it, I mean, I'd always intended to light up every significant star and celestial body in the tapestry. The piece was intended to inspire young minds in STEM. It was never meant to just be an artwork. It was meant to be an interactive experience and blur the boundaries between art and science. So for EMF Camp, I actually had the help of an amazing team at REA Group Hackathon, where we managed to use AWS and an ESP32 microcontroller to light up just 8 of the 88 constellations in the zodiac. And that was very cool, and that was working at EMF Camp. But now in preparation for an exhibition, and particularly with a conservation team on board, who are wanting to preserve the work for 100 years, I had to completely reimagine how these electronics were actually going to function and also be preserved for the long term. So circa 2020, 2 years and 1 child after going viral, I embarked on a whole new journey into electronics. So this is the prototype. I had to get sign off from the conservation team on materials. So it was really handy having a prototype as a proof of concept showing how it's going to be assembled and how it's actually going to work. So you can see here a sample of the knitted layer. So it's actually got a seam running through it as well. There, as I mentioned, there are 7 panels, so 6 seams in the work. So understanding how the LED layer will work with the seams in the tapestry was really important. So that's why there's a seam in the prototype as well. So directly underneath that knitted layer, we have here a really simple piece of 100% museum quality cotton. And you can see that there are the constellations drawn on the cotton underneath the knitted layer. And zooming in now, we can see, so all the electronics are actually sitting in the back of the work. We have eyelets, which is allowing the light from the LEDs in the back of the work to actually shine through. And the eyelets are protecting the open holes in the cotton fabric. Through these eyelets, you can see some acrylic light wells. So the light well is what's actually channeling the light from the LEDs in the back and poking through the knitting so that we've got a really strong pinprick of light through the knitting, even though the LED is actually a couple of layers beneath. You can also see that the seams in the backing fabric correspond to the seams in the knitted layer. And the reason being that when I produced the original knitted layer, I actually moved the stars ever so slightly, either left or right of those seams, because I didn't want to start sitting directly on the seam, which means that in the backing fabric, I can have these same seams and know that there won't be any LEDs sitting directly on the seam. So here this is what it looks like at the back. We've got neopixels, each one of them having three pins going in, 3 pins going out. So it's 5-volt data and ground going in, and then 5-volt data and ground going out, so to create a string of LEDs. And on each panel, we have a separate string. The reason being we don't want a single point of failure for this electronics. No one point of failure should be able to take out all of the LEDs at one time. So 7 panels, so 7 strings of LEDs. And those LEDs are actually glued directly onto the eyelets. So and that glue is just like super glue. Reason being that super glue is very strong, but it's also incredibly brittle. So if an LED fails or a bunch of LEDs fail during the exhibition, then I can actually go in and replace them by using a shear force against the LED, and it should actually cause the glue to break, and that will enable me to desolder the LED and just quickly hot swap and replace it without too much work. So I did have a few discussions with the conservation team around the ordering of lighting up these LEDs, and their original thinking was that the string of LEDs would be in order of what appears in each constellation. But I stressed to them that I wanted to use this traveling salesman problem, and that is minimum number of, or creating the shortest distance for every destination, still getting to every single destination. So that means we use the minimum amount of wiring to still achieve the same effect, where none of the wiring actually crosses over another piece of wiring. Given the scale of this thing, the weight of the wiring was a consideration. So we didn't really need to use as little wiring as possible, hence the traveling salesman problem. And I will come back to that in just a little bit. So a couple of other things. So we're also using pigment ink formulation pens for preservation purposes. They shouldn't fade quite so much over time. Low odor glue. Overlocker to protect the raw edges, so you can see that the raw edges have been overlocked. Lead-free solder and also lead-free immersion gold finish on the circuit board, which is less toxic and also more reliable in the long run. So lots of considerations, and that was all signed off by conservation, which meant I could work on the real thing. So you would think that creating each panel completely individually and then assembling it together at the end would be the most efficient or the easiest way to do things, but I actually found that I needed to sew everything together up front, largely because in the middle of a pandemic, I've only got domestic equipment available to me at any one time. So if I had done all the soldering first and then stitched it all together later, there's no way I could have actually fit all of that soldering, particularly when I was using a very brittle glue, to actually fit it through a sewing machine and an overlocker as well. There just wasn't enough space. So I really did need to just create the entire backing fabric in one large piece and then work on it from there. So that's an overlocker. Especially when I found an op shop for $15, which is great. All right, so here we have the entire backing fabric laid out on my living room floor. This piece has been taking my entire living room now for several months, so that's been delightful. So the next challenge was, how do I get that the image of the tapestry onto the backing fabric? So I found that the solution here was definitely a lot of pins. So laying the backing fabric out and stretching as tight as I could, lots of pins to pin it down, laying the knitted fabric on top as well and pinning that down really strategically. I then used lots and lots of pins. I think in total I ended up using like 500 pins at any one time. I did actually go back and catalogue every single star and celestial body that I wanted to light up in this piece. So not every star that's pictured has a light attached to it. It really depends on the magnification of those stars and how significant they were. I think in total ended up being 840 LEDs in the piece. So definitely lots of pinning. And it was quite backbreaking labor too. Like this is a hell of a lot of work. And this is like, I think a couple of weeks of just pinning and you know, bending over this giant tapestry, trying to get 840 points as accurate as I possibly could. So it was a lot of work and I'm really glad that's over. And you can see there is how that's starting to look in the backing fabric. Now, I know that the backing fabric is never intended to actually be seen by the general public, but I was really conscious that this thing's going to be preserved for the long term, so I did want to make it as neat and nice as I possibly could. Right, so the next step, how do I get the that image that I've translated from the knitted layer to the front of the backing fabric? How do I get from the front of the backing fabric to the back of the backing fabric? This is one huge piece of fabric. It's over 4 meters wide and 3 meters tall. So flipping over continuously for 840 points and then, you know, drawing all the lines as well, it was way too much work for my taste. So I'm a little bit embarrassed by the solution, and you know, it is what it is. But I ended up just using a makeshift table. So this table is just basically a piece of MDF, which is 3 meters long, and sitting underneath the table with the fabric hanging over the edge. It meant that running pins through it, I actually had access to both the front and the back of the fabric. So I could, you know, sneak in underneath, double check all of my stars that I wanted to light up, run pins through, and then sneak out from underneath the table, go around the other side and actually do all the drawing onto the fabric. And then once all that was done, I dragged it onto the floor and then put in all of those those eyelets as well. So a little bit awkward, very strange. I had my own little cubby house. My kids were very jealous. Right, so that's all of it. That's the backing fabric with both labels on the front, labels on the back, and also all those eyelets have been punched. There was a lot of hammering. I'm very good with the hammer now. Right, now, so what we're up to is the LEDs themselves. So coming back to that traveling salesman problem. So traveling salesman is an NP hard problem, and I'd love to tell you that I solved an NP hard problem as part of this project, but I absolutely did not. So the tricky thing with an NP hard problem is that it becomes more computationally expensive for every point that you add exponentially. So a lot of solutions to the traveling salesman problem works perfectly well for 30 or 40 points. But for my, I think the worst panel was panel 6 with 140 points. That was well and truly beyond the capabilities of a lot of solutions I was looking at. So you can see here the links to the open processing. So I did use open processing because I was translating it from a bitmap image, which is where all of my stars were located, in order to draw between all of those individual points and work out the shortest distance, because I was working from a bitmap. And open processing is really, really good with images and bitmaps, so that's why I used it. So the actual code in there, you can have a look at it. I think it's just got half of panel 5 currently pictured, so you can have a play around with that. It's an evolutionary algorithm that is optimizing the routes for every generation. So it passes through lots of generations, and for each generation where it's found a more optimum route, then it will adjust the route accordingly. So once we have the traveling salesman solutions, I then went into soldering mode. So I was no longer working on the floor anymore, which is really nice. No longer on the floor. I was now at the desk. The desk was just the right length for the entire tapestry and one panel at a time. So I did work one panel at a time, and then once I'd done all the soldering on a per panel basis, I then dragged it over the desk. In this picture, the rest of the tapestry is actually sitting underneath the desk, all folded up. So I just dragged it over the desk, and the soldered points were slowly being draped down one side and then onto the floor. One thing I didn't account for in the traveling salesman problem that I did was the curvature of the cabling. So because the direction of all 6 pins are very specific, the cabling also had to have certain curvature to it. So the solution when there is no curvature to the cabling isn't necessarily the optimum solution for when there is. And that's just a side effect of, by the time I started soldering at this point, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to go back and try and recalculate out all of the optimum points when what we had was already pretty good. Right. In this photo, I'm actually watching a live stream by Jonathan Oxer, and I'm going to misquote John Oxer here. He likes to say that making 50 of something is the pit of despair. So you can just imagine where I was with 840 LEDs to solder, stuck at home with 2 preschool kids in the middle of a lockdown, unable to call in help. I had provisioned and I had planned for all of this, knowing that there was a pandemic in place. But at this point in 2021, I genuinely thought the long lockdowns were over and that daycare wouldn't close again. I genuinely thought at this point that the short snap lockdowns would be effective. So when we did go back into a long lockdown, I had a huge amount of work and I couldn't actually work on it. For the non-parents out there, it's not possible to, or you can't actually keep young children safe and solder electronics at the same time, particularly when those electronics are filling an entire room. So that was definitely a challenge. I'm still not entirely sure how we got through it. There were many long days spent running after the kids, followed by long night soldering. It wasn't easy, and I definitely wouldn't recommend it. So this is the point where it's nearly done. No close-up photos of me at this point. I was definitely exhausted and yeah, fairly stressed. But it was very cool to look at. The nice side of it was that the more LEDs that we put in and soldered, the bigger and more beautiful the piece became, which is really very cool. And although I didn't let my kids in very often to see the piece, the few occasions I did, I'm actually really glad I did, because to them it is significantly bigger, or looks so much bigger than it does to me. And seeing their faces react to the lighting effect was very, very cool. So in some ways, although it was really hard, in some smaller ways, it's also a little bit magical. So there it all is. It was all done. All those 7 panels and 7 strings of LEDs are all wired up and ready to go. Very exciting. So relieved that was done. And there's my husband John, rare sighting of him. He helped me flip the whole thing over. So we very carefully kind of rolled it up onto a tube and unraveled it again so that it would be lowest impact on the lights and the wiring. And then we laid the tapestry back over the top to see how accurately everything ended up, if anything was suddenly surprisingly wonky, or if any of the LEDs were off their stars. But it turned out to be remarkably accurate, which is so cool, right? It's so amazing that after so much work and so under quite stressful situations, that it all just kind of worked out in the end. And also knitting happens to be quite forgiving as well. It's stretchy and it's malleable, and if something's slightly off, you can just nudge the knitting and everything's fine. Right, so we've got 10 minutes to go, and I still haven't talked to you about the interactive side of things. So there's not much I can actually show you at this point because it's still going through the final phase in design, a visual graphic design. But the intention for the interactive component is basically coming back to that science versus art idea. There's one piece of the interactive which lets you learn about the stars and learn a little bit of astronomy and look up the planets and get to appreciate the map from a scientific space. But also there's another half of the interactive piece which, the tapestry itself is a giant light show. So the other half of the interactive actually lets people jump in and create their own light show using the interactive interface, which is really, really cool. And with these two different pieces combined, there's a third state for the tapestry, which is where it comes alive. So the idea being, if no one's actually interacting with it, then it takes the logs from the previous art and science interactions and actually combines them and in its own way into a really beautiful light show combining both art and science. So don't ask me about that algorithm. I'm still working on it. I'm incorporating a decay feature so that it will change over time. So it'll only ever show, what people have been doing or interacting with it recently, rather than the entire duration of the exhibition. So if you come and visit it again, it should actually look quite different. Also, the technology side of things is very different to how we had it set up for EMF Camp. So the Wi-Fi at the State Library of Victoria isn't entirely reliable, largely because it's an 1800s building. It was never really designed for modern technology. So I've redesigned this to be completely standalone. With the two tablets connecting to the tapestry via Bluetooth, and in order to do that, they had to be native apps. So I used React Native to build that to an Android app, which enables tablets to talk to the tapestry via Bluetooth. That's really cool, right? Because I don't think this was even possible 2 years ago. I think this is still kind of a new thing, relatively new capability that I'd never played with before, and I was really thoroughly enjoying. You could even have a brick wall between the tablets and the tapestry, and it would still work, which is really awesome. And there it is. Again, we've got the prototype coming back into regular use. So this is actually, we did some user testing back in December, which was a lot of fun to see how people use this app and the delight on their faces to see what they do in the app actually changes a real live physical device, which is really awesome when the two aren't even physically connected. So it did cause quite a lot of excitement when we were doing some user testing on that. I don't think anyone's ever seen the whole thing put together yet, and I don't think that's going to be something anyone will see until maybe a month at most before the exhibition. So this is really kind of the best photos I can give you at this point. So in closing, the starmap has been referred to by many as a work of innovation, but in the Western culture, there still exists, even today, strong social conventions that tell us what we can and can't do. Boys can't knit and girls can't code. So I realize this might sound a little bit contrived, but I genuinely believe there are thousands of amazing innovations still to be discovered out there that sit at the union between one social convention and another. So instead of telling yourself, knitting isn't for me, I can't hack a mechanical device, well, what if you did? And that's everything. Thank you, everyone. It's quite a yarn. Do you have any questions at this point?
Sarah, that was amazing, and there's so much love coming through in the chat during your talk. It's quite inspiring. I think the night sky has something powerful to inspire people, and I think you've captured that really well. And that's, I think people are certainly appreciating that, as you well know from your Twitter store. Wow. We do have some questions, and we do have a bit of time for them if you're willing to take some.
Absolutely.
So I'll just go through these as they've come in. Have you hacked the overlocker yet?
That sounds awesome. If I could hack the overlocker so that it automatically threads for me, so I don't have to thread it, that would be fantastic. So not yet. Stay tuned.
Not yet, then. On the roadmap, perhaps.
So
there's a question around the orientation of the printed panels, and so it was, why was the decision made to hang them vertically as opposed to horizontally? Was it a structural thing?
Yep. So it's because in hanging, all of the gravitational weight is on those stitches, and the stitches are the weak point in the piece. So particularly if something is going to be preserved for a really long time, you don't, and the intent for it is to engage young minds in science. You want it to be on display as much as possible. So you don't want actually the process of hanging it to cause it to become more and more fragile. So a vertical seam doesn't have the gravitational effects on it the way a horizontal seam does.
Next question. So this is clearly a long process. How did you manage to maintain focus and momentum, particularly in the face of a global pandemic and having kids and everything else? So what's your secret, I think, is kind of the question.
Of course. There's a great quote that I have on a post-it here, actually, right on my screen. Here it is. It says, "I didn't come this far just to come this far." And I find that really helps me rephrase things, because it can feel exhausting, and you can get to the point where you're like, enough is enough, I'm over it, it's done, just sell the thing. But you know, when you've made such an impact and you've achieved so much, it is such a shame to just let it all drop and let it all go. I feel like this thing really needs to be finished, and I feel like the star map deserves a final home. So that's what I've been focusing on.
Okay, the questions are coming in thick and fast now, and we're lucky because we actually have some time to answer them. Is the library or the museum going to be storing a digital archive of the design? Do you know?
Yes, I believe when I made the donation, a big part of the donation was the digital artifacts that go along with it. So the knitting machine files that I used, that I generated and used to create the star map, are being stored, as well as the original graphic image.
Cool. Another one that's kind of, I guess there's a couple of questions that are more around like questions of, have you tried this in the design, and did you do that? So one of them was, have you thought about doing a continuous strip of pixels along the elliptic so it could show the current position of sun and planets?
I love that that's what someone suggested, because that was actually part of the original spec. So before the long lockdown, I did want to put in a whole separate string of LEDs through the equatorial line. Ran out of time on that one, sorry.
I have a question that I thought of because I've done bad things with LEDs in the past. What were you doing for the fire retardant? Like, how many fuses were involved? Did you have one on each panel, or like?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'm gonna put that into like, no, don't ask, don't tell, because yeah, fuses are important in projects, it turns out, with NeoPixels. Cool. I think that's pretty much what we had. Oh, there's a couple. No, there's some more have come in. As I said, people are just hammering this at the end. You've conquered the observable universe. What next? I think the question is related. There's another one that's, what is your next project? I think is basically what we're getting at there.
Yeah. Fair question. I have been asked this a lot, and I still don't have a good answer. I think right now I'd really like to go on holiday.
I hear that. Cool. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up. That was a really good talk. Thank you so much for your time, Sarah. We're going into afternoon tea, or for us of us in New Zealand, a dinner break. And we'll be back in, what is that? It will be about 30 minutes. So we'll see you all back here at 3:45 Australian Eastern Standard Time.